We are honored tonight to have Dr. Joey Cope give the charge to the class. Dr. Cope serves as an associate professor of conflict resolution and reconciliation in ACU's Duncombe Center for Conflict Resolution. He played a central role in founding and shaping ACU's Department of Conflict Resolution. Dr. Cope has served ACU in various capacities over the years, and he also maintains a law practice. He and his wife Nancy have 2 sons and a granddaughter. Please join me as we welcome Dr. Joey Cope.
I'm thrilled and honored to get to speak to you tonight. In fact, I was somewhat overwhelmed by the great responsibility that I have. After all, I'd like to tell you that when you hear what I have to say tonight, it'll change your life more than anything you've ever done. I'd like to tell you that what I will say tonight will have more to do with your future success than any experience you've ever had. I'd like to tell you that, but of course it's not true. We're all about research here at ACU, and I considered applying for a grant with the Apple company to do research on what graduates actually remember about commencement addresses. My plan was to design an app that would randomly shut down your iPhones over the next year until you answered a question correctly about my speech. Other faculty members discouraged me from doing that. Apparently, that would be wasted research. It's a very well-established fact that most of you won't remember what I say by the time you get to the stage tonight. But I'd like to share a couple of ideas with you that I hope that you will think about and that you will carry with you. But first, I want to invite you to be part of a peace movement. And before I go there, I want to share a somewhat related story from my youth. 40 years ago this summer, I was a counselor at Camp Grady Spruce on Possum Kingdom Lake. It's a real place, Possum Kingdom Lake. Over the course of that summer, I was introduced to some new perspectives. I became aware of the responsibility we have to the environment. I grieved with a junior counselor whose father was missing in action in Vietnam. I learned that great experiences can be shared and deep relationships formed with people who were different from me. I discovered that I might not always be right about everything. I was also introduced to the consequences that arise when you slip a dead tarantula in the luggage of a camper right before he goes home. And through that experience, I began to understand a little more about the personal imperative we have to create peace around us. Alan, the camper, was a smart aleck kid. He was always causing trouble for other campers and for the staff. As his counselor, I did my best to reshape him. Looking back, I can see now that I didn't invest a lot of energy in him. I was afraid that if I made that investment, that he would require more of me, and so I avoided him. A few days before the end of the session, I found an injured tarantula, and not knowing what I should do with it, I took it to the camp nurse. We called her Patches, and Patches made a quick assessment of the tarantula that really wasn't her area, but she took a look at that little spider that was about the size of, it seemed like at the time, my head, and decided that it was in pain and that we should euthanize it. So she dropped the spider into a jar with some ether, and in a few moments, the spider got very still, and Patches proclaimed it deceased. I took the jar and slowly and ceremoniously walked back toward my tent and decided that I would find a place out in the brush where I would dig a shallow grave and bury the tarantula. But then I came up to the crafts hut, and I had this great moment of inspiration. what if I decoupage the tarantula and preserve it for all time? And so I did. It was quite a trophy. And at the time, I was just about to go into college. It was my senior year. I just finished my senior year in high school, was about to be a freshman in college, and I had plans to be a biology major. And I thought, what better way to start conversations in freshman labs than to take your own decoupaged tarantula? I proudly put that tarantula up above my bed on the shelf there in my tent and was looking forward to taking it home. Well, back to Alan. On the last day of the session, Alan was in rare form. He had really gotten under my skin. I'd had it with Alan. I was ready for him to get on that bus and go home. We had told all the campers to pack up their stuff, to get it up to the parking lot, to load it on the bus. Alan went to the parking lot and started causing trouble there, but he forgot to get his trunk, a huge trunk. So with a great feeling of martyrdom, I went back to the tent, going to grab that trunk, carry it up there, and be done with Alan. And then yet another moment of inspiration. I opened the trunk and removed the top layer of clothes and very gingerly put the tarantula into his belongings, covered it back up with the t-shirts, and then quite cheerfully, carried the trunk up to the bus and only wished that I would be present when Alan opened the trunk later that day. Revenge was my motive. Conflict was my aim. And payback was my wage. It never occurred to me that Alan might not be the one who would open the trunk later that day. And from what the camp director told me about the conversation he had with Alan's mother, I feel sure that she didn't enjoy or value this inspirational moment I had engineered for Alan. Fortunately for me, there was no hard evidence tying me to the event, but my conscience was pricked by the visual image of Alan's mother screaming and grabbing large objects and throwing them toward the trunk. My misguided attempt at justice and revenge had run its course in an unintended way, and that's almost always what happens when revenge and extreme justice take hold of us. Conflict is all around you. In John 16, Jesus promised us we'd have conflict. He said, I have told you these things that in me you might have peace. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I've overcome the world. You have a choice. You can choose to live freely in peace, or you can choose to live imprisoned in conflict. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is living in such a way that you can move freely through conflict. Notice these words. Peace is living in such a way that you can move freely through conflict. Peace, in and of itself, is a movement. In our conflict resolution program, we've discovered that this special peace comes through balancing two opposing forces in our lives. Those forces are justice and mercy. Justice is essential in an imperfect world. We've learned that to live together, we must establish some sort of structure that holds people accountable. Justice can be wonderful, but you can have too much of even the most wonderful things. Extreme justice promotes individualistic rights, and the individual becomes more important than the community, and justice becomes a tool of war and aggression against those who oppose us. Yet, when handled appropriately and responsibly, justice is good. But we simply must not lose sight of the counterpart of justice. Mercy is essential in a world of imperfect people. Even the best of us can't measure up to every standard. Mercy brings us to a place of movement, both in negotiating life's difficulties and in bettering our relationships. I want you, as graduates, to consider seeking peace by balancing justice and mercy in your life. It is at those sacred places of balance where we experience a moment like no other, the moment of reconciliation. Simply stated, you can be part of this peace movement if you will pledge to do your best every day to balance justice and mercy. You won't do it perfectly every day, but the effort counts for everything. Hold people accountable by all means, but do so with mercy in your heart and with love for them. I felt little love for Alan that summer. My effort to frighten him was my feeble attempt to do justice. But now, 40 years later, I wonder what greater impact I could have had if I had mixed in some mercy with that. You might say that doesn't matter. Alan probably doesn't remember. His mom might not even remember. But there must have been some conflict there because I remember. I remember that I didn't do completely right by Alan. I don't know what direction his life took. All I know is that I missed an opportunity to build and sustain peace with one other individual. I was afraid to act mercifully because I feared the way it might affect me personally. In the few minutes I have left tonight, I can't possibly tell you everything you need to know to achieve greatness in this peace movement, but I can tell you how to start. Peace begins with faith because faith overcomes fear. To be peacemakers, we must not be afraid to step forward and to actively balance justice and mercy. In our scripture reading, Dr. Sharp-Pena read just a little while ago from Mark 4, we had the story of Jesus and his followers getting in a boat and going across the lake. And you remember hearing that story. Jesus falls asleep on a cushion in the front of the boat. A violent storm comes up. His disciples fear for their very lives. And finally they wake him up and they say, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus said nothing to them, but he stood up. He rebuked the winds, and he spoke to the waves, and he said, "Quiet," or peace, "be still." And a great calm came over the lake. Then he turned to his disciples, and he said, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples had forgotten that Jesus was in the boat. It was almost as if Jesus said, "What are you worried about? I'm in the boat with you. Do you not remember anything I've taught you?" Even with the storm raging, there was room for peace in that boat because Jesus was there. The enemy of peace is fear. The enemy of taking positive action is fear. Overdoing justice comes from fear. Overdoing mercy comes from fear. Balancing justice and mercy is the result of faith. Faith comes from putting aside our fears and trusting in Him who loves us and seeks to be reconciled with us. I invite you to join me in bringing peace to this world. Begin by building and sustaining your faith. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn His face toward you and give you peace. Have no fear. Jesus is in the boat.